This afternoon I'm off to do a couple of little jobs in the garden, and I thought I'd bring you along. The basic tasks I'm doing in both of these jobs is something that I think is really important, that most people should do in their garden at any time when they're not actually growing a productive crop. Now, the first job that I have is to plant some green manure into this area. I've been trying to improve this soil for the last couple of years since I started using it. Over this summer I grew pumpkins in this area. The crop wasn't very good, as I explained in the last video. So I'm continuing to try and improve this soil. Now, for the last, it's probably around about 3 to 4 weeks now, the hens have been in here and they've been scratching around. They've spread around the straw, the compost that I had here for the pumpkins. Now, you'll see there's little clumps around here of what looks like grass. Actually, it is wheat that has germinated from the straw. I don't mind that. That's fine. I'm not going to try and take that out. Instead of coming in and cultivating this again, I'm simply going to spread my green manure around and then use my favourite fork hoe to scratch it in. Now, there's also a few weeds in here, which I brought the chipping hoe here to actually chip those out as well, to bring them under control. But the first thing I'll do is actually throw the green manure seed around, because as I work the other tasks, it can actually mix that green manure in. Now, what do I have? Well, I've mixed up a bucket here which is largely oats, and to it I've added some broad bean seed which I have kept from my own garden. And once the oats germinate and come up to around about 4 or 6 inches, I'll let the hens back in here again, and they'll have a good pick and a scratch again. In my past experience, they generally leave broad beans alone, so I'm not really expecting them to actually eat the broad beans, and that will mean that the broad beans will continue to grow for a little bit longer and help fix some more nitrogen into the soil. But eventually, in springtime, I'll have to come back in, and I will probably cultivate at that point before I replant. So the first task is fairly simple, and that's just throwing this around. And I'm being fairly generous because I've got a fair bit. It's quite cheap to buy oat seed, and not all of it's going to germinate. Probably, you know, scratching it in like this, a portion of it will be consumed by animals. I have actually closed the hens out of here now, otherwise they'd be in here to have a feed as well. So what I'm really trialling in this area is a fairly minimum till. Yes, I do probably still come in with the rotary hoe and till it about once a year, but where I can avoid tilling, I'm doing that. Look, I think it builds probably a better soil structure across the year doing it that way. Not that I'm entirely opposed to tilling, but I think too much of it, as we know, can lead to soil compaction and damage some of the microbes in the soil. So that's the first stage. I've spread the seed around. The second stage, as I mentioned, is to go through with the chipping hoe and take out any of the major weeds. Now, there's a bit of black nightshade in here. There's a few other things coming through, just some odds weeds here and there, some spots worse than others, but it's not going to take me too long to get through and do that. So now that I've finished chipping the weeds out, I'm simply using the fork hoe to stir the soil a little bit. Now, we had some rain last night. We've been getting some small amounts now, not lots, but enough to make this soil nice and damp and soft, and so it's pretty easy to scratch it and just stir this seed in, particularly with all this straw around, because often all you have to do is get it underneath that straw a little bit and it'll germinate. The use of green manure, I think, is one of the best things you can do to improve the soil, and one of the best ways of using some of the downtime that you might have too. In most garden cycles you're going to have some downtime, and rather than just letting it sit entirely fallow, I think green manure is a great way to go. Of course I'm using oats because we have winter approaching. In a different climate you'd use a different grain or similar fast growing plant that's going to produce good vegetation, and different legumes of course too. So simply a matter of choosing what's appropriate for your area. Okay, that's now complete and I'm out of breath. You'll still see some seed sitting on top of the soil, but that really is not a problem. Most of the seed has been some way covered under the straw, under the soil, and will be ready to germinate as soon as we get the next little bit of rain, which I don't think will be too many days away. Then we'll soon see that green manure coming through. So I'm off to do another little job now, so I'll bring you along, doing probably at the end much the same, some green manure, but also a bit of cleanup first. Now I'm mixing some more green manure for this next patch, and I put in the oats, the broad beans, the same as before, but I also have here a bag of old seed. So this is vegetable seed of all kinds. There's beans, there's corn, there's broad beans, there's pumpkins. It's a real mix of old seed that I had and have decided don't need that anymore. It's actually probably too old to be sufficiently viable. Now, rather than just throw it away, I'm adding it to the green manure, where a portion of it, probably a fairly small portion, will germinate and give me some nutrition back to the veggie garden. So the second job this afternoon is to clean out the tomatoes. Now they're well finished, vines have all died, there's a few weeds growing, and I filled my pockets with a few tools because one of the first things is to actually strip the tomato vines off, because these went up, as you can see, quite high. They would have liked a trellis much higher than I had and bent over. So I need to cut them off so that I can actually get the frames away. One of the mistakes that I made when I started growing tomatoes was to use something that I had available, which is baling twine, to tie the tomatoes on. And being a synthetic plastic substance, of course you had to clean it up every year, and it's really annoying. What is so much better, now I'm using a natural fibre. This is either hemp or sisal, and a couple of different ones here. The beauty of these is that they will both decompose. Also they blend in with the vines and they don't look unattractive, but they will decompose. So I can drop it on the ground, put it into the compost, and not really worry about it because it's going to break down quite quickly. Now that the vines are off, I can release the frames from the stake. Now I do wire these on because this is the one way I can guarantee that it's nice and secure. Now I could just cut these, but I'll untwist them. So once they are free, I can carry those away where I store them over the year. One of the issues with frames like these is storage. Now I find the back fence of the chook pen here is the best place to keep them. In the absence of a puller, this shovel, which is a well, a plumber's shovel, sometimes it's called, is a great way to get them out. Now I've just got to be careful because down here I've got my irrigation still, but coming in beside, getting down deep, and this one is in very deep, but generally you can get them to come up. Yeah, there it is, got it out. Now this one broke off, which is not that good because it means I've got a piece of wood in the soil, but it is fairly deep. Shouldn't be too much of a problem. Now that that's all out of the way, I'm going to pull out the irrigation. Now what I have in here is a weeper hose. It's a double run, goes up and back, and again, so 3 runs it was. Forgetting now, after so many months. Getting this out of the road means it's safe for next year. So repeating that for each one. With that all out of the way, I can come in and rake up the vines that are there and put them on the compost. Now, I also have a problem here. There's a couple of spots in this patch that I have accidentally introduced some comfrey. Now, comfrey is great stuff, but you don't want it growing amongst your veggies, particularly an area like this that I frequently, well, at least once a year, cultivate, because cultivation will break up the roots and every part of the root will grow. So I'm going to try and extract it as carefully as I can, but the odds are I will not be successful in removing everything, and I'm going to get more back. That feels fairly good. Looks like most of those roots have come out unbroken, and I'm happy with that. There's another one, and so I'll go through and do that with every piece of comfrey I can find. Well, again, it looks pretty messy at this stage. There's tufts of what looks like grass, but again, as in the other patch, that's wheat from the straw that's germinated. So I'm ready now to go and throw this green manure seed around, and again, the same as the last patch, I'm just going to scratch it around so that it gets a bit buried. Well, that's done. And it's now ready to germinate over the next few weeks. It will start to grow up. As it gets about so high, around about 4 to 6 inches, I'll come and cover it with plastic. No, I won't dig it in. I'm turning away from that in most cases unless I'm in a real hurry. And I'm not with this because the next crop that's actually going to come into this ground is pumpkins, and that's not going to happen until October. So I have around about 5 months for this to actually grow and compost down. So once it's grown up, just covering it with black plastic will mean that the worms can come up and have a fantastic feed over winter. By the time I actually take that black plastic off, there's hardly going to be anything left on the surface of this ground. And the soil will be greatly enriched, I'm sure, with all that nutrient that's gone into it. Now, the corn stalks behind me, I talked about in the last video, and I've had a few people comment that the solution is to cut them down and run a lawnmower over or something along those lines. With many lawnmowers that probably works. With mine it wouldn't, because my lawnmower as fantastic as it is, absolutely hates dry stuff. It chogs up really quickly. So I have done it with small amounts, but with something like these corn stalks, it just doesn't work. So I'm working on another solution. Not sure whether that's going to happen or not. I'm not in any rush to pull them out, because while they stay there, they are dying back and the roots are decaying in the ground, and the roots will actually give some nutrition back into the soil. The soil life will feed on those dead and dying roots and give something back. So letting things stand like that really doesn't matter. It is another way of getting some nutrition back into the soil. So the sun is disappearing behind the mountain now, so I think it's time to call it an afternoon. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back with another video soon.